I'm Lucio Caruso. I serve as Director of Mission for Catholic Charities here in Louisville. We are the outreach arm of the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese of Louisville of 24 counties. And my work is really to not only communicate, but to invite not only our wider church, but many community partners in the service of people in all kinds of different ways. We have 10 or 11, 12 different kinds of programs that are really aimed at bringing about the well-being and wholeness of individuals and families from pre-birth early on all the way to our work in nursing care facilities and so forth. So it's trying to make the world better. That's been a challenge always and even more recently. But what I love about what I do is I realize we don't do it alone. There are so many great nonprofits, educational institutions, and business and government. We work with everyone in this effort and mission. So it's really exciting to be a part of that. I am also an ordained permanent deacon of the Catholic Church and serve at a wonderful parish called St. Ignatius Martyr, which is made up of peoples from 6 or 7 different countries, both in Africa and the Asian South Pacific. It's really neat to be part of that, to really have a real piece of the world where I feel when we gather for worship, that's what it really is, which is very much like our agency too, because we have people from all over the world that work with us, from many of the refugees we've settled over the years too. So, but anyway, that's a little bit about me. And I've also done a lot of teaching around our Catholic faith and how we approach things, our world, and so forth. So I'm excited to be a part of this and shed a little light on this aspect of our faith. So.
Yeah, and I'm Danny Duncan Collum, and I'm, I think it's the introduction indicated, I teach at Kentucky State University in the English and journalism, I teach writing, and I'm a journalist. Sometimes I'm a Catholic journalist, sometimes I'm a journalist who's a Catholic, you know, depending on the venue. I think some of y'all have had access to an article about this, about the Warhol exhibit that I wrote for U.S. Catholic, which is a monthly magazine that comes out of Chicago. And yeah, I think most of my my journalism I write for 2 different, one ecumenical and one Catholic monthly magazines about culture, the arts, media. One of the pieces is, you know, one of the columns that I do is really focused on the arts specifically, and that's what the Warhol exhibit article was for. Another one I write for a magazine called Sojourners is more broadly, you know, kind of media criticism and popular culture think pieces, or thumbsuckers as they're called in journalism. So, you know, that's how I ended up with the opportunity to go to this Warhol exhibit as part of my work and get a chance to write about it. And it was just, you know, great, because I've since living in central Kentucky, I'm always begging people on one of the coasts for access to, you know, a video or a film, or you know, review copies of books, and you know, I'm having to get them to, you know, take notice of somebody out here in flyover country. So the fact that I got to see the Warhol exhibit and nobody else did, you know, who was going to write about it, was just a lot of fun. So yeah, I think that and the relationship between art and faith is obviously, you know, central to a lot of what I write. Lucio, also I want to say I've heard Lucio Caruso preach, because deacons get to preach, and you should go to St. Ignatius Martyr to hear him preach. He's a good one.
Thank you. All right. So for myself, I'm far from being an artist. I can't draw anything. I can appreciate art, though I do try to understand even preaching as painting with words. That's as closest to art that I get. But in a lot of my preaching, I have used paintings and art because I do find that that is what really speaks to the soul and hearts of people as much as possible. I use a lot of symbols. They're not props, as some priests sometimes might say of me, but they really are. It's art. It can be a large rock. It can be a painting, whatever it might be. But I do that because when I do a lot of teaching around, I often come back to one major, what I think is our best contribution as Catholics, or our Catholic ethos, I guess you could call it, and that is the Sacramental Principle. I think that's the starting point for everything. And it sounds kind of lofty, but what it really means is that the ordinary and everything around us has the potential to point us to and bring us into that connection to the mystery of God, or the mystery of the divine, the mystery of our own existence, that there is nothing that cannot be a vehicle for that, which is why, as a church, for the most part, we have valued the work of art, painting, sculpture, which I've been able to see a lot in Rome on a number of trips there, and to Florence. That just amazes me. But all of that was based on that principle. And I was thinking about that lately as I've enjoyed just the colors of fall that we've had this year. I think the best ever. But that everything from daffodils in spring to these fall colors to the starry constellations that illumine our evenings when we can get into a real dark sky. All of those I look at as part of God's own gallery, God's work of art. I think that is where it all springs from. And that is where we encounter God. I don't think we can encounter the divine, the mystery of God in just some abstract way, but rather through these many vehicles of life itself and creation around us. And I think that's where those who are artists, be they like poets and other creative people, they're just, I think, more aware of that. They take the time to ponder that. I've done a little more of that this fall, actually. I've done some walking in some of these beautiful colors and being with trees. I've actually hugged one tree recently. I stood, or actually sat with my back against this tree that had just the most incredible yellow colors with the sun coming through. I buried myself with the leaves around me, which I hadn't done since doing that with my kids when they were small. And I just was present to all of that, and even smelled those leaves as I brought them up to my face and nose. And it was a beautiful experience. And I kept thinking, gosh, if I was an artist, I could paint or draw. But I was actually doing a little verbal poetry, because I think in that gallery of creation of God's artwork, it brings out of us our own desire to some way, not so much capture it, but be captured by it and communicate it to others. But I think that's, for me, is the heart of our Catholic faith. And our best preaching and teaching, I think, happens when we are able to do that. Even in my work with social justice and the issues that address the human family, I have found the best ways to teach those things has been through some great work of art that expresses and captures the faces of people. Artwork I've used of paintings from those who have been Rohingya refugees in their plight into Bangladesh. I can talk about that and give the data and numbers, but when I show a piece of art or a well-done photo by a photojournalist, boy, that just brings people into that place to listen to the message and to feel a kind of encounter with the reality of many who suffer and struggle in our world. So for me, it's that, Danny, that Catholic sacramental principle that inspires everything for me in my own connection to God and the divine, as well as to the world and my wider human family in every way.
Yeah, and that's the I'm an adult convert to Catholicism myself, and that sense of the Catholic faith as one that is incarnated in everyday life, in human history, and the ongoing human story. It was the religion I was brought up in. It's like the incarnation of God and humanity ended with the ascension, and Jesus popped back up to heaven and would come back and judge us someday. And in between, we were on our own. And the Catholic vision that the incarnation continues, that the real presence of Christ even continues through the sacraments of the church, and it gives us a sense of the holiness of the everyday, that the holiness can penetrate the everyday of our experience. And that was kind of rolling around in my young adult perception of faith. When I first encountered Andy Warhol's work, and I didn't know that he even had a Catholic upbringing, much less continued to go to church occasionally and practice his faith in some ways anyhow. I didn't, I had no idea of that. I wasn't Catholic yet myself, but I knew enough that I thought of him as I saw that work, and I said, "This is a Catholic artist. This is Catholic art of the late 20th century," because what Warhol did from his turn, towards what pop art came to be called, was to sanctify the everyday, to see a significance, a transcendent quality to the everyday that you don't. That's just right. It's right there in the supermarket, in the soup aisle, or in the cleaning products aisle, or in the soft drink aisle. The Brillo box, the Campbell soup can, the Coke bottles. That, because that's that consumerist, capitalist, commercial, commodity culture is what's around us. That's what we live in, and even the idea that even that can be art just made perfect sense. And then find out that, well, yeah, there was something to that perception, that the man really did see the world that way. And I think when people who see this haven't been to the exhibit yet, when you walk into the exhibit, the first thing you see is a huge reproduction of the Econostasis, the images that would be at the front of the church that Andy Warhol, he was then, went to every Sunday and every holy day of obligation, and probably some other days too, as a child and young, and even in his college years. And it's a huge panel of icons, of iconic renderings of images of saints. And that's what becomes, that's forms. That's why it's at the beginning of the exhibit, because that's what forms his artistic vision, was 15, 20 years of soaking up the sights and sounds and smells of sacramental religious practice of the Eastern Catholic Church that he was raised in. Now, most of what we think of as religious art, and what Lucio has seen in Rome, in which there's nobody goes to the Southern Baptist Convention headquarters in Nashville to see the pictures. But they flock from all over the world, to see the pictures and statues at the Vatican. But it's Renaissance art. That's our picture of religious art, and the artists of that time, the kind of the classic religious art that we think of, they often were depicting the characters of the biblical story, of the Judeo-Christian story, as characters of their time, of like the 1400s, not of, before the Christian era, Palestine. You'll see, Roman soldiers coming to arrest Christ, who are wearing, they're wearing pants. The guys they're wearing pants, and they're wearing those poofy hats, with a feather on it. They're Renaissance soldiers, and they were putting the people of their time into the Christian story. And that's what Lucio does with preaching. That's what liturgy is supposed to do, is, to put us into the Christian story, into the story of, the Jewish and Christian story, and the story of redemption, the salvation of the world through God's entry into it. That's the problem, is that, and that was great. The problem is that artists kind of lost interest in religion. And I don't know, I think did the artists lose interest in religion, or the church lose interest in the artists? I don't know, but it happened. And so, that it cuts off there. So we've got churches full of, Italian looking or Flemish looking or whatever, religious figures that don't communicate to our, to our reality. And that's what, but that sense of, the putting, the communicating the religious significance of everyday life through the images was something that, went with Warhol from Pittsburgh to Manhattan. And you can see it in the image, the multiple images of, like of JFK or Jackie Kennedy or Elvis, or who's a big figure in my personal religion. Those are directly linked, as the exhibit shows you, to to the iconography of the Eastern churches. And I'm going to show you something. If we can get this work, I didn't. Here it is. Okay, here's an image of a Warhol image of Jackie Kennedy after the assassination at the funeral. She's veiled. And the other image is a traditional, religious art image of Our Lady of Sorrows, which is one of the traditions about Mary, the manifestations of Mary's, Our Lady of Sorrows. It was Mary at the foot of the cross at Jesus's crucifixion. And as I think I said in the article that y'all may have read, that image of Jacqueline Kennedy could be an icon of Our Lady of Sorrows in any Catholic church, including the one here in Louisville, Our Lady of Sorrows. But of course, several $100,000 it would cost. So because we live in a commodity culture. But yeah, but that's what it is. It's an image of Our Lady of Sorrows, and it's bringing the historic experience of that moment of tragedy in American history, and mixing it with the story of God's incarnation and the Paschal mystery of his death and resurrection. And I'm going to stop share. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that I think we're looking at here. There's one other thing that I would throw in, because like Lucio, I'm primarily a writer guy, deal with words. And my background training I have about aesthetics or anything related to the arts is really from literature and really as a writer. But so most of my ideas about what it means to be a Catholic artist actually come from Flannery O'Connor, who is a name that's being, not looked at quite so favorably, these days, because of discussion of her her racial attitudes, which, you know, were of the time and place, but there were also Southern white people in the time and place who, you know, transcended those attitudes. But I think she's still, a reliable guide on, for writers and for literary artists on the practice of the craft. And what she said the main duty of the Catholic artist was to do good art. And by which she meant to render life as it is in the world as it is. And she was just downright snide. I mean, she could be vicious. She was downright snide on the notion that art should be self-expression. It's rendering the external realities in detail, for the reader, for the viewer. Not, sharing one's feelings. Okay, well, by both of those standards, obviously Warhol is a Catholic artist. He didn't turn his gaze inward to abstractions of the mind, but outward to the objects and images that surrounded him in the late 20th century world. And he rendered them as they were in minute detail, but washed in a peculiar light. James Agee, another Southern writer who's an Episcopalian of sorts in the same way that Warhol was a Catholic of sorts. But Agee talked about this as rendering the cruel radiance of what is. Mm. That's what you get in the Warhol icons and his other work. There's another, when I was thinking about this exhibit and having to write about it, one of the most helpful things that I read was some parts of a book about Warhol by Arthur Danto, who's dead now, who is the art critic for The Nation magazine for a long, long time. And Danto wrote, Warhol demonstrated by means of his Brillo box the possibility that two things may appear outwardly the same and yet be not only different, but momentously different. Its significance for the philosophy of art was that we can be in the presence of art without realizing it, which of course, as Lucio said, we are every day in the creation. Dante went on to say the artist confers transcendence on the object by the act of beholding its beauty. And I'd say the only difference between that and the sacramental incarnational Catholic vision that Lucio talked about is that we put a capital T on the transcendence. Because that's what we say about the bread and wine of the Eucharist, about ordinary human-made substances that are really God's presence among us. And they're ordinary objects that bring us into the presence of God, whether it's in our churches or the crucifix on the wall of a Catholic home, the painting of the Angelus, I call it the Angelus that we have in the dining room at our house, things like that, some of which are sometimes blessed by priests. Priests bless these objects, these religious objects, art objects, rosary beads, and those become portals or reminders that keep us in the presence and aware of the divine presence that's always with us. Dante, this is the last thing I was going to say, but he also said, and I'm just going to read this passage. He says, talking about Warhol's, Brillo boxes or soup cans, etc. Of the four vessels today claimed to be the Holy Grail, the chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper, the one that most persuades me that it might be genuine is an ordinary looking vessel, drably colored, rather like an individual salad bowl in a vitrine in the Cathedral of Valencia in Spain. It really looks like something Jesus could have used at the table, given that he affected the life of the simple persons he lived among, carpenters, fishermen, and the like. Of course, as befits so venerated an object, it's supported by an ornate and gilded stand embellished with pearls and emeralds. But if you saw it by yourself, it by itself, it's unprepossessingly plain. at the Last Supper, if it was used at the Last Supper for whatever was eaten on that tremendous occasion, it was actually touched by the lips or fingers of someone who those present were certain was the Messiah. Jesus himself was like that bowl, if indeed the claim is true that he was God in human form. And I would say that this exhibit, Revelation, tells us in the text panels and so forth, and shows us in the work that Warhol was one who accepted that claim about Jesus as true, and that knowledge lit up everything he did, and that's something that will makes him the what did Danto actually thought he was the Picasso of our age. So
yeah. It makes me wonder, Danny, had Andy be living today, given what he might be expressing in our time right now with so much of what we have been experiencing through this COVID pandemic, the resurgence, if you want to call it, of our issues of race and social unrest and trying to come together as a people, the divisiveness and polarization. I was trying to think how he would possibly capture or express some of that. I don't know if you had a quick thought on that.
I think it's like, the Jackie images that talked about and showed. Apparently, right after the assassination, he went to his studio and said, "We got to get to work." And you start tearing up newspapers and magazines with images of and doing what he did, to transform those into the icons that we get. And I think, this is certainly not, from what I know of the biography, certainly not a man with a political agenda particularly. But when you first started saying that, I kind of chuckled because I was envisioning Donald Trump panels in orange, but I'm glad he didn't get to do that, maybe. But I think he responded to tragedy, and to the joys and tragedies, right, of the common life that we have, and that's what you see in some of those works. So, like, including the Elvis, right, because Elvis was a life force that lit up the middle 20th century. And of course, by the time that Warhol did his images of Elvis, Elvis was, living like Bigfoot, hidden away. It's, that's certainly, he would be like immersed in the reality of our time. He also had a chance to deal with the pandemic, with the AIDS epidemic in
that's right.
And
right,
there are images of grief and mourning that
Good point.
that were part of his body of work from the 1980s. And of course, as a gay man, he was, and in the art world, he was, at ground zero, where people were dying at a really tragic clip. So yeah, we do have that to go back to in this time of the pandemic.